So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay on the recently released public version of the new build of Reforged. And we have seen this map once before. It was during the build-up, although it was quite early during the build-up to release, and this is the revamped version of GULDUR, which I really like as a fortress, honestly. It's sprawling without being too massive. I mean, we won't go through the map too much because I have done that once before, but you do have the outer walls, which can't be used in the same way as normal siege walls on Medieval 2 can, because you can't put units on top of them, which is a blessing and a curse for both sides, I would suggest, but they do still function as fortifications. You have the gates, and then you have several ways up to the summit of GULDUR, which can be pretty labyrinthine. You have the caves, which you can take through here, all of the forging down there. You also have the outer routes, which ultimately lead up here, and it's not a completely equal fortress in terms of how much space there is all around the town centre either. For example, the forces of Lothlorien just over there are going to have a much shorter shot to the town centre, but that also means they'll have the thickest fighting first and foremost. So we'll start with them. It is a 3v4, I believe, and we have Revios over here who is playing as them. Now, Lothlorien on the attack have the same benefits and weaknesses that any elves on the attack will have. They will bring the quality, and that's one thing that you can say about them, but their numbers, and certainly at the lower end, their more lightweight nature can be a bit of a problem if their allies don't support them, and especially considering that they are closest to GULDUR's citadel. Although Lothlorien should, considering the events of what happens in the books, feel quite at home fighting for GULDUR. Lothlorien Bladesmen, though, or Lorien Bladesmen, with the grey cloaks of the Malorn trees. We have a decent unit here. They're going to be able to go toe-to-toe decently with all of the evil defenders on a one-to-one basis. We also have the Galathrim Axemen over here with the throwing projectiles that they now have. It is a big difference to how Lothlorien used to be, because it gives them that damage-dealing potential with a throwing projectile as well, making them certainly more damage-focused than the slightly more defensively adept Imladris. We also have Galathrim Spearmen in there. Of course, high-tier Elven units are always going to bring a good amount of finesse, even though Lothlorien do also combine that with a decent amount of armour as well. And obviously Elven Spears don't suffer quite so much from the Spear Malice, but they are very small in terms of the amount of units, in terms of numbers that they have. Sindar Blademasters as well, and then a little bit further back we have a horde of rams and ladders as well. The Kindred of Celeborn, which are also now a throwing projectile unit, probably the strongest unit of throwing axe, in fact definitely the strongest unit of throwing axemen the game has to offer in terms of high tier stuff. Some standard Lorien Spearmen back here. We also have some Lorien Archers who are interestingly pushing up rams, Karen Amroth Rangers, 2 units of Karen Amroth Rangers in fact, so interesting, but plenty of cover behind those towers though, which is probably the idea. Lorien maybe going to be taking a little bit easy early on, letting their allies take a little bit more of the initiative. Another Elven faction as well, SR Jackson playing as Mirkwood, a little bit more lightweight, a little bit better in terms of melee defense, probably a little bit more damaging with archers, but certainly not as potent with throwing projectiles, so plenty of similarities, but also some notable differences, especially in this kind of situation, in this kind of fortress. Hiri Lang, very similar to the Sindar Blademasters we saw before, in terms of heavy Elven swordsmen. Woodland Realm Axemen as well. I mean, it is an intimidating sight, the fortress on the horizon over there. We also have the upgraded Hiri Lang over here, a nice contrast there between the two of the Mirkwood units. The Hiriak also with their armour upgrades as well, nice shield value on them in addition to that. Elder Palace Guard, the two-ended glaives I should say, as well as being two-handed, one of the best all-round bodyguard units that the game has to offer, and should do very well one-to-one against most of the Orcish defenders, though rarely is it going to be one-to-one, let's be honest. Elder Council, javelins are always going to be useful when it comes to trying to clear a fortress. The elves will need to be a little bit more careful about how they use them because of the lower numbers, but of course the individual javelins are going to hit harder as a result of that. And then the Hiri Pang as well. I mean, in terms of archers, of course, Mirkwood are going to be very dangerous, but whether they can find the good positions to use them effectively in GULDUR remains to be seen. Elven Kingsguard, of course, got those axes as well as their secondary weapon, which should help against all of the Orcish defenders and Goblin defenders. Hiri Lang, and then more Woodland Realm Axemen. There's probably some hidden units from Mirkwood around as well, plenty of units that can hide anywhere, of course. Again, a reasonably straight shot to the town centre, so I think again the elves will probably want to at least give their allies a little bit of an opportunity to try and make some ground up, try and take some of the heat off of them, because it is going to be another of the factions which is in and around the upper part of the Anduin Vale. we have Dale, played by Master Blaster. He has got some Dalian Spearmen. They're going to be a little bit more at home when it comes to trying to mulch their way through a congested defence, but they're not going to be able to rely on that because, of course, the Orcs, that is their bread and butter. Dale are still going to have to rely on the combination of solid defensive stats in addition to a bit of those numbers. The Dalian Spearmen and Dalian Infantry with the armour upgrades as well should do a decent job at doing that. They should outperform the equivalent Orcish factions, but it's whether or not they start getting hit by projectiles. Lake Town Pikemen should give them a decent anchor in melee as well. Again, plenty of Dalian Infantry. I like the composition here actually. Good amount of regular units as well as the Dalian Bowmen moving forwards as well. Obviously in terms of skirmishing, Dale might be a little bit more at home than Mirkwood because they don't spend as much on heavier archers, and that's probably where the battle will be won and lost, at least early on. Mirkwood will have to save their projectiles for later, I think. More pikes. We also have the high-end armour-piercing projectiles of the Blackshot Dragon Slayers with those handheld wind lances of theirs. We also have some river patrol back here, some Bardian marksmen carrying the ladders, so not skimping in terms of the units that they need here. Dale and Bardinghurst should do very well against Orcish defenders as well, with the armour piercing, again with the slight slant on defence that Dale tend to have, packing on the armour a little bit more so than certainly the other Northmen, but also many of the Western Kingdoms don't have armour values that are as good as Dale at the high end. Earls of Dale as well, to give them a little bit more rigidity in terms of cavalry defence and Dalian sword mass over there, and the Athala Rangers, an interesting inclusion, but plenty of damage as well as a bit of mobility. You just got to be careful with how you use them. This gate leads straight into the caves at the side, and that's going to be the Rhovanions' task to try and deal with. Again, another force which geographically does make sense to be going after Dol Guldur. It's just next door after all. We have the tribal levy spears in and around the Rhovanion nobles over here, so you know, the quality bodyguard units surrounded by the tribals, that is the Rhovanions' main strength. After all, we've got more tribal levy spears, more levy spears. The phalanx could be really key in those caves in order to try and really anchor the Rhovanion in place. Second unit of the nobles is an interesting one, double dipping on bodyguards. I mean, I suppose with the slightly smaller roster that the Rhovanion have, that is something that you're more tempted to do. Slingers, the slingers and the javelins I think are going to be absolutely vital, as well as the berserkers, because they are going to need the damage that these tribal units are capable of doing if they're going to make any sort of headway in the caves early. And there are the javelins. So moving on then to the defenders as we make our way into the caves, we have, well, that's an interesting name. We have that guy as Mordor. We have some Uruk Halberds here who are going to be trying to defend. They'll struggle against the phalanx, but Mordor don't have any sort of other long weapon unit that they can use for that sort of job, so needs must. A good defensive unit of spears in the Morgul chosen. The Nazgul are down here as well. I don't know actually, considering the numbers that are down here, Mordor probably will reorganise themselves. I mean, this has the potential to be an exceptionally long battle at 70k frames, but I would imagine there's probably going to be some sort of phase at the start of the battle where the defenders start moving around a little bit more. We have Colonel Speaks, who's playing as the very numerous Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Snaga skirmishers. These cheap javelins are going to be key when it comes to doing some damage at range. We've got these little defensive positions as well, which are good for archers. I mean, the lack of walls in Dol Guldur means that these little defensive points are where the archers are intended to stand if you do want to defend some of these key points, but at the moment we've got the cave trolls packed in like sardines up here, so I would imagine that they're not going to stay there for too long. Ardenheim Shadowbows from Mordor once again, Heavy Goblin Crossbows. I mean, crossbows, Temple Guard, they've got plenty of really high damage projectiles here, the evil factions. I mean, they have less variety when it comes to that sort of thing than certainly the elves and some of the attackers in general have today. But if they're able to be surgical with some of these units, they can be devastating. The crossbows in particular could be really, really good in a settlement like this. Angmar being played by Flame of the Rebellion. Good to see. We have the Barrow Wights who are going to be acting as that melee tar pit, as they always do. We've got the Witchround Pikemen here at the centre of things also. Angmar, of course, a real nightmare to fight against when they're able to dictate the battle how they want to, because of how heavy duty they are and how difficult they are to get rid of, but perhaps the qualities of the attackers will be enough for that. The Gundabad Guard are here, the White Uruk Fearmongers as well. Not too many surprises, and I don't think there will be. We have the newer model on the Trolls of Angmar here, which is a little bit more in line with something like the Guardians of Khan Doom, for example. Goblin King's Guard, Moria Spear Guard, the most effective frontline unit that Moria really have in terms of doing what they do best. Yeah, Witchround Blackguard. We also have more of the Sauron's Will. We have the Cave Troll Drummers, More of the Trolls of Angmar as well. I mean, a huge amount of orcs here, Uruk infantry, Angmar halberds. We've got the Blackback Mountain Berserkers in there as well, the fresh coat of paint on the Snow Trolls, the Olag High, the Witchers. I mean, this is going to be an absolutely vital unit. The attackers can't afford the Witchers to be effective in this sort of situation, because the numbers that they can fall back upon within their fortress is going to be significant. Even with only 3 defenders, because they're all orcish factions, they do have the numbers. So if they can bottle the attackers up, that's going to be problematic for them, especially when you consider Goblin War Engine as well. So I think this battle is going to come down to how well the attackers can punch through certain points quickly before they get bogged down, and before key throwing, or well, key projectile units in general, like the Witchers, like the crossbows, like the War Engine, can really do their thing. They've got plenty of damage dealers in melee as well, but there are only 3 of the defenders, and ultimately, if you're relying on a melee slugfest, you've got the quality of the elves, and you've got the variety that human factions bring. That's a dangerous game to play, and it's not one you need to in this situation either. Blackwatch Legion are back here, and then way at the top of the settlement. Interesting to see the Orc fellas are back here with Barrow Wights and some Guardians of Kharn Dûm, but that may change here at the foot of this citadel. Like I said, I think there's going to be a cut here. I can't imagine it's going to be too quick that this battle gets underway. I mean, 70k frames is exceptionally long, even for a pretty big fortress with many players on it like this, but we'll see how it goes. I mean, stranger things have been known to happen, I suppose, but yeah, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So this is going to be a long one, as we could see from the amount of frames that are in the battle, but so far all the attackers have done is peeled away all of the outer gates, and now they're going to start poking the defenders with a few of their ranged units as and where they can. Worth doing, because I don't know how much use you'll get out of the Silver Thorns anyway. Going after the Ardenheim Shadow Bow is also a decent choice of target, because they will certainly be able to do decent amounts of damage, especially to those elven forces. I'm a little bit disappointed actually that the defenders have decided to consolidate away from this, at least this area of the fortress, so early on. They certainly have the numbers where they could be making a little bit more use of the space, but it does of course give the opportunity for Dale to move in directly, and they will also be able to move into the cave system and meet up more with the Rhovanion as well. So as much as it may seem like a safer option for the defenders to do this, it may end up backfiring a little bit if the 2 human-led factions can link up with one another and try and make good use of their numbers. Because the elves, of course, they're going to have to be a little bit more cautious in what they're doing. I mean, Lothlorien could move their way in. They push the siege towers up. They need to be a little bit careful that they don't actually block their own advance here, but it's a little bit of a difficult situation to use your siege weaponry because of the walls of Dol. You're not going to be able to climb on top of them as such, and also the bridges along the outside on the 2 elven approaches here mean that you're going to have to sort of consolidate your forces quite close to the walls if you want your reinforcements to be close enough by to utilise, but that's not the not ideal. A huge amount of space to be used, but like I said, the elves should consider being a little bit more cautious in this fight anyway if they are going to have any sort of success. There is a cave troll here stuck against the wall. This is a little bit peculiar. The Elves of Dale just sort of hanging around near them. They are bloodied. I don't exactly know what's going on here. I mean, starting to swing their blades now. The trolls seem to be bugged by the looks of things. But a couple of free troll kills for Dale. Master Blaster certainly won't say no to that. Stadium Paladins there as well. We've got the Temple Guard who are utilising their own armor-piercing arrows, trying to go after the advancing Rhovanion forces, the tribal units leading the way with those spears, but it's the Berserkers that are going to be of biggest concern to the defenders. Certainly the rank and file orcs will not like being on the receiving end of the damage that those Falxers are capable of dishing out. Slightly more bulky units as well. Rovikin Nobles on the way forward as the melee engagement begins. Berserkers getting into play, albeit the Halberds will fancy their chances at holding back these units at arm's length, trying to mitigate the damage that they're capable of dishing out. Numbers will be the Rhovanions' friend here. Ardenheim Shadow Bows firing away as well. Tribal Levy Slingers starting to throw their payload into the Mordor Chosen, one of the more effective defensive units that Mordor have at their disposal. Rhovanion are here. I mean, Dale should be moving forward as well, and indeed they are, because I think the cave system here is one area, because the defenders didn't retreat from this area, which is good, because you don't want to see a situation where the defenders simply retreat to the final stand immediately. But this is an area where the numbers of Dale and the Rhovanion can be used to good effect, and while they do have the high ground here, it's not perfect in terms of the angles there. The Berserkers are covered by the terrain a little bit, and if ranger ammunition is being used on tribal levy spears, I'm sure that the attackers won't mind that too much. Some more defensive units are hot ones as well. Forward come the Lake Town pikemen, going to be trying to utilise that range against the shorter range of those Uruk halberds from Mordor. They are going to need something in and around them to help bulk them out as well. Meanwhile, further over here, Mirkwood's still playing the long game, as are Lothlorien, which is good to see. Not entirely sure what the thinking is behind putting the siege towers so close. It's going to make it very difficult to advance through them now that you've put them all here, but on the flip side of that, it does mean that the enemy can't chase you out of the fortress if that's their desire. And the defenders certainly have the possibility of doing that. Meanwhile, Goblin War Engine looping those projectiles out and managing to hit some of those Lothlorien bladesmen. Bits and pieces of damage, but nothing too devastating, and that's the problem that Lothlorien may have, is if they do advance into the settlement, that Goblin War Engine could make them pay very dearly indeed. We'll see. Meanwhile, some of the Mirkwood units now crossing the bridge. We've got the Woodland Realm Axemen and the Hiriak, but the sheer numbers that the defenders still have at the more central area of the fortress is such that the elves are going to struggle. Generally speaking, an attacking siege is where the elves' lack of numbers can really be used against them unless they are played a certain way, and this is not exactly ideal for them. The sheer numbers of the defenders here are going to be too much. The Barrow Wights as well means that even if the elves do get the wind in their sails, they're not going to be able to really push through with any sort of urgency. Combination of all of the long weapon units, the numbers of goblins, the Barrow Wights, it's simply going to be too much for Mirkwood to push through with any sort of urgency. They are going to need to hang back a little bit more, and you can see that they're already starting to break some of these elven units. Not ideal for them. There's something called the Palace Guard as well. I don't know about this. Hopefully the battle doesn't get away from them. Meanwhile, still over here, large amounts of damage being done to the tribal units, but cheaper in comparison. They won't mind that too much. It's the sort of thing which Mordor often bring to bear against their enemies, cheap throwing projectiles that, again, using all of those Temple Guard arrows and also the damage from the Ardenium shadow bows as well. Is that a good use of ammunition? I think the Rhovanion would take that trade, especially seeing as the slingers have been helpful as well. There's one unit of Mordor chosen starting to get constricted a little bit by the Lake Town units and the tribals. Still holding on though, and still steady, and they are receiving reinforcements now in the shape of some Uruk infantry. Still taking some hits there though. Shadow bows on the hill. Still some of the heftier units of the Rhovanion waiting to move in. Numbers of those tribal levy spears as well. Blackshot Dragon Slayers now the choice of target for the Ardenium. Interesting, the Blackshot Dragon Slayers going after the Uruk infantry, perhaps trying to turn the screw a little bit, give them a little bit more momentum, but in order to really take advantage of that, I'd suggest they need to start thinking about moving forward with more infantry. Dale, try and put some pressure going this way as well, start making their way towards the position of the fortress Mirkwood are at, give them a little bit of help. And considering the fact that the first defensive position Dale could have run into was abandoned early, they can systematically move to the aid of their allies. Barding Herd, they're trying to use the river patrol, but the narrow nature of the fortress makes those javelins a little bit more difficult to use. Barding Herd, again, it's the Barrow Wights, so you're not going to be able to make your way through these defensive positions with any sort of urgency, but neither of the Barrow Wights really going to be capable of doing tons of damage to a unit like the Barding Herd, especially if that formation establishes itself in such a narrow area. Cracking through the armoured shell of these ghouls. Might have a little bit more of a problem with the Witch Realm pikemen if they push their way forward, the range on those pikes. Javelins as well, ready to provide overwatch, so it's not an easy task here. Hiri Lang moving backwards. Yeah, I think again, caution is the order of the hour for the elves for the moment. If the humans can make their way towards the elven positions, interestingly enough, a few of these Lothlorien forces are going to stay here to keep the defenders honest, but it looks as though the vast majority of Lothlorien are actually going to move over to the Rhovanion, which is an interesting call. I mean, surely the defenders will see this and think, well, now we can bulk up a little bit more on the cave approach. We're going to need to if there's going to be some elven quality added to the pressure which is already mounting over here. Good use out of those archers though, Mordor. Again, on what kind of units does make a difference, but the Rhovanion phalanx taking hits from those ranges. The shields and the armour will help them, but still definitely a worthwhile unit to go after when you've got such a clear shot at them. Mordor chosen, again, being very reliable here. They were in a pretty hairy situation for a moment there, and they were able to hold on pretty resolutely. Some of the standard Dalian infantry moving forward. They'll do very, very well, of course, against Orc fodder. A little bit of an emergency measure to try and patch some holes here. They're definitely the ones taking the lead in the cave defence. Should have plenty more reinforcements should the need arise, and more Mordor chosen are on the way. It's a matter of buying time. Plenty of that still in this battle. Dalian infantry on the way forward. The Athala Rangers pushing their way in as well, only 56 of them, but mounted Rangers, the amount of damage they can dish out is incredibly significant, but surely the Temple Guard will see them and immediately try to push them down. I mean, this is a bold move because the Athala Rangers are not exactly resolute when it comes to survivability and melee, especially, I mean, the Orc fodder are spears as well, and now they're taking crossfire, so this is a risk. It could pay off. What was that? There's a sound of artillery being utilised. Dale still keeping the pressure on over here. Again, a combination of Dalian infantry, that Barding Herd unit that we mentioned before. The further into the Barrow-wights they push, however, the bigger part the Witch Realm pikemen will be able to play. Plenty of reinforcements as well, so Angmar and Mordor. Misty Mountains largely still in and around the top of the settlement. Mirkwood still waiting. Some speculative shots being sent over the walls by the elves. I mean, any hits that they land on basic units will be well received, I'm sure, but killing off units of fodder and Goblin War Engine crew maybe not ideal. Poison projectiles. It's unlikely that you'll be able to rout even lowly goblins at this stage in proceedings when they're not being tackled in melee. Temple Guard taking hits now as well. Very accomplished in melee as well as the damage that they can do at range. Whatever happened to those fellow Rangers? Did they perish? I don't think so. Managed to sort of reunite a front line now between the Rhovanion and Dale. Tribal Berserkers still doing very nicely. And as much as there is a fresh unit of the Mordor chosen on the front line, and as well as they have done, this is the kind of force that they're not exactly ideally equipped to defeat. Just trying their best to hold the line. Definitely reliant upon the support of their missiles here. Down come the Trolls of Angmar from Flame of the Rebellion. Their new look, in keeping with the jet black of much of the rest of the Witch King's host. They force their way in. I mean, Tribal Berserkers are one of the units which will be better placed to deal with some of these heavy combat trolls. Indeed, they're one of the only units actually for the Rhovanion in melee which will be decent at that role. Right in and amongst things now, and I mean, the Berserkers may be there, but the Lake Town Pikemen will do very poorly against a unit of trolls like this. Dale themselves are not exactly well known for having damaging infantry, it's more solid defensive forces, and you can see now routing off as well, so timely use of the trolls there. More units on the way down as well, Snaga archers, just sheer numbers, so managing to do a decent job. The other unit of Tribal Berserkers now moving in Rhovanion archers being engaged in melee, that Trolls of Angmar are not quite as scary as something like the Olag High, but they will do much the same job. Where that formation was united, now it's slightly parted. More Chosen pushing over that way. That one unit that was holding the fort, there's still 7 of them left. Only now are they succumbing to their wounds. Here, meanwhile, Temple Guard poking their way out over here. Dale still facing down these Angmaran forces. Victory seems certain. The Witchhound Pikemen and Barrow-wights again. It's a slow burn that units like this will be able to deal damage, but they will stay standing for a long time. Mirkwood's ill-advised attacks earlier on, easily thrown off by a primarily Misty Mountains force. Still some Barrow-wights over here from Angmar as well. Still, just some scattergun shots from Lothlorien making their way over the walls. A high amount of archers, of course, that Lothlorien brought. I mean, most Elven archers are going to be pretty decent in melee as well, so it is worth just keeping the pressure up. This is a 3v4, let's not forget, so the pressure is still on the defenders. They may have the numbers as Orcish factions to be able to sustain more casualties than if it was the other way around, but this is the sort of damage which will start to add up. Sauron's Will, definitely worth going after. Big damage on them. Fairly expensive unit for what they are, but big damage nonetheless. Snow Trolls as well. Yeah, it's gonna... Time will tell whether this damage will suffice. Trying to respond in kind as well, the defenders, by launching their own arrows over the wall from these Uruk archers. Again, the Elven, well, the basic Elven units, I mean, the Galadhrim archers will be just fine in a skirmish fight with them, but standard Lorien archers are a little bit lightweight for trading fire. Galadhrim archers will be pretty decent in melee as well, of course. Mirkwood doing much the same thing as well. So that area of the fortress is being saturated with Elven arrow fire. It's not at its most damaging, but still, these are the sort of kills which will add up in the long run. Towers on the horizon from the central citadel. Over here, pushing forward with some Lake Town pikemen. Trolls of Angmar over here though, again going after the pikes. I mean, the Dalian Paladins are in the background. They represent the best unit Dale have for trying to counteract some of these monstrous infantry units. Fortress, into the caves, the belly of the beast as it were. Dalian Swordmasters pushing their way forward alongside the tribal berserkers. That's a lot of attacking power heading the defenders' way, and Mordor starting to lose ground. Done pretty well with their defensive units so far up on that cliff top over there. Snaga skirmishers trying to utilise those cheap javelins to good effect. Temple Guard have done the business at long range. Now getting involved in melee with long swords drawn. There's pikes in there, in phalanx, Guardian Marksman snuffing around as well. Here come the Earls of Dale. Mass perhaps trying to really break the back of this defensive effort still. Uruk archers being left behind a little bit. They can start to try and clear off those Snaga javelins now. Mordor will have to reorganise. Dale and the Rhovanion have done a pretty decent job at pushing their way through the caves. It's not been without cost, but the more progress they make, the more aggressive the elves can potentially be as the battle wears on. Berserkers, I mean, being left behind in melee, there's no way these Snaga skirmishers will do well against these kind of melee units. If they still have ammunition, they should absolutely be saved for later. The sort of thing which at long range can do a good job against something like the Dalian Swordmasters. Meanwhile, here in this courtyard, plenty of numbers still for the defenders here. Now, Orc javelins throwing their javelins into that narrow gap. It's a thankless task that Dale have trying to advance through this choke point. Doing their best to do so. They need to keep up the pressure after all, but it is still in the caves where the attackers are having the most luck. berserkers still there. Still firing a few shots in, Silverthorn arrows, thudding against the crumbling walls of Dol Guldur. Amroth Rangers now doing their bit as well. Firing over the hill, I mean, hitting the cave trolls, doing a decent amount of damage. Uruk archers also going to take their share of casualties here. You can see scattered corpses, not huge piles of them, but it's the sort of thing which we can only really judge as a success or not come the late game. If the defender's manpower can keep itself together, then it's a sign that these kills were not enough. I mean, they can scarcely miss. They're going to hit units over here. I think the unit they're going after, though, is probably the Blackback Mountain Berserkers, a very dangerous unit, of course. And actually, as they hit, they will be in support of the advancing forces of Dale and the Rhovanion. So all of this does serve a purpose, and also now the Orc Javelins are being hounded by the tribal Berserkers, which will give Dale a bit of respite down below. Swordmasters heading up onto the walls as well. Elves of Dale in and amongst things. I mean, standard Goblin infantry and Snaga skirmishers, so it's the lowest of the low from the Misty Mountains, which are currently holding the line, but there are enough of them to the point where this is certainly going to give them enough respite to figure out what they want to do next. Units in behind as well. Rhovanion nobles on the advance, genuine quality and sturdiness. They do need a unit of infantry, because otherwise they're going to end up surrounded on that wall. I'm a little bit surprised that Alien Swordmasters decided to go onto the wall, to be honest with you, because the Berserkers don't need help against the Orc Javelins, really. It's only a matter of time before they clear them up. More and more Goblin infantry arriving. Arrows finding their way over here. The Blackbacks being in close proximity will be a concern. Rhovanion nobles on their way forward. I mean, it's a little bit scattered here, but the low quality of these goblins means that I don't think the attackers were too worried about how this particular engagement is going. Down here, without the continued support of the Orc Javelins, you can see the trolls now starting to fall away under the armour-piercing blows of the Barding Herd. They've done their job though, the trolls. They definitely disrupted Dale's rhythm, especially with their Lake Town pikemen, but this is still a very solid defensive position even without those trolls doing the damage. They can just fall back on trying to outlast Dale with the Barrow Wights and the Witch Realm pikemen. Only a fool could lose this battle. Guard close by as well. Meanwhile, the Goblin War Engine just in time to see Thranduil fall. That's an unfortunate loss for the Elves, but not the be-all and end-all. I think the problem is they bulked up again. Mirkwood probably the ones to struggle for a foothold in this battle the most. And now they're also close enough to the point where they're taking return fire from the Goblin Archers. Of course, there's no comparison in terms of quality, and many of those arrows are missing, and those that hit are less likely to result in a kill. Still, I mean, late game, Elven morale is good, but it's not infinite. The loss of Thranduil could yet prove to be a problem, but Mirkwood, they do need to be careful. They don't have the manpower to be playing around like this, and they've already taken a bigger beating than most. Still, Lothlorien waiting. Still got a few units left in reserve way back there. I don't know if they're down in the moat still, so they actually haven't pushed around to join Dale and the Rhovanion, biding their time and waiting for an opportune moment to strike. Rhovanion nobles still killing their way through all of the Goblin infantry that stands in their way. The Blackback Berserkers will fancy their chances though against the upper crust of Rhovanion society. Alien Swordmasters and Berserkers working in tandem with one another, one armour piercing and one a little bit more defensively adept. And the Dalian unit wearing their plate. Javelins now being completely occupied by the tribal berserkers, and it will be a simple task, albeit a slow task, to finish them off. Rhovanion nobles, 67 of them. A bit of support. The damage has been done over here. A few corpses scattered around as a result of Mirkwood's archers doing their thing. This is a bit of a concern though. One of these little firing platforms. Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen, one of the most dangerous units the Misty Mountains have, really, especially in a situation like this where they're on the defence, because they're going to be able to do an awful lot of damage unless some sort of counter-skirmishing can go on. Not the best at taking damage, certainly not the finest in terms of armour quality that they were. Further back, trying to unite their positions, the Rhovanion putting a little bit of pressure on this little side defence with the Gundabad Guard resolutely in their way, very similar to the Mordor Chosen that we saw earlier on. Do exactly the same kind of job, not the best at dealing damage, but certainly quite adept at withstanding it. How much do Dale still have in reserve? They've got a unit of Bardian Marksmen, they've still got the Paladins, and they do still have the Athala Rangers, which pull back, but Dale have had to cover multiple angles, so they certainly don't have an infinite manpower supply. Javelin support from in behind is that. River Patrol. Definitely a worthwhile target going after the Blackbacks, but again, the Rhovanion in a similar vein have had to cover multiple angles as well. How about this position? Try and... there we are. The other avenue, which the Rhovanion and Dale have had to try and take advantage of, a more direct route to the town centre this, and could offer them the opportunity to link up with Lothlorien rather than Mirkwood, but Snow Trolls wading in over here, and the vast majority of the units which seem to be trying to make headway over here are pikeman. Trolls are very good against pikes, the Cave Trolls and the Snow Trolls trying to smash these attacking units down, and they will have success, you would imagine. The longer that this continues. Alien Paladins making their way over here, however, could be exactly the unit to try and deal with that. You can see the Rhovanion General there with his wings. Again, all it takes really is one of these attacks to start faltering in a significant way, and I would worry for the attackers. At that moment, I don't think the Elves would have a choice. I think they would have to activate and try and make some sort of progress into the fortress, even if it's not ideal for them. Victory seems certain for them now, so the support of those crossbows has been massive. With more armour piercing being added for the Orc fellas as well, so as much as the Rhovanion Nobles are a strong unit, they're being answered with exactly the kinds of units which are going to be pretty decent against them. Bardian Marksmen starting to loop some shots as well. And all of these speculative use of archers from the attackers, but it's not as if they have much of a choice, and the damage is needed. Trying to shoot some shots over there. How many kills is that going to be worth in the long run? We'll have to wait and see. Mirkwood pushing forwards again with the Hiri Pang. The Goblin Archers firing away. More and more the ammunition supply is looking in favour of the defenders, which is a comfortable place for them to be. Way into the cave system, still the Snow Trolls. I think the Cave Trolls have started to falter a little bit, if not entirely. They do have a tendency to push forwards with gusto, but yeah, the Dalian Paladins, Snow Trolls as well, the Misty Mountain Trolls in general are not made of the same stuff as their Orcish brethren are, but they're still going to be good against pikes and the like, but as soon as you start trying to mix it with something like Dalian Paladins, they're going to start to fall away reasonably fast. Indeed, one Cave Troll remains. Still nearly full strength Snow Trolls, but that should start to change. Mounted Earls as well. Might be useful for the mass here, just to keep these forces pointing in the right direction. Again, trying to loop those shots over. The Athala Rangers, I believe it's still true that mounted Rangers have got the body-piercing projectiles, which is rare now, so it's something which Dale, I think, only share with Arthur Dane and Harad, I want to say, are the only ones that have access to this sort of unit. I mean, if the defenders clump up, it's the sort of thing which can be used to devastating effect. Victory starting to seem like more of a possibility for the attackers there. Javelins still facing off against the tribal berserkers, who now, without the support of those crossbows, who have vacated this area. They have had some counter skirmishing. Still the Olag High though, the most dangerous of the defending trolls today. And the manpower is starting to look a little bit sparse for the attackers over here though, which is a concern. King nobles facing off against the Blackback berserkers, some support coming in from the real control of Lothlorien, just trying to angle some shots over the heads of their fellows. Victory a distinct possibility. Tribal berserkers. Goblin crossbows now out of ammunition, being used in melee against the unit that they were so effective against just prior. There are so few of them that might suffice now, but obviously not the reward they would have been hoping for, I'm sure. Meanwhile, still guarding her, doing a good job in a difficult situation for their forces. That metal wall Angmar represent, always difficult to force your way through. They use it to great effect when they're on the attack, but it can be just as effective as we're learning when they're on the defence. Surrounded by the numbers of the Misty Mountains and the specialist troops of Mordor as well. Mirkwood coming in a little closer now, thinking perhaps of launching another attack through this gate. Hasn't gone well so far, but there are less units over here now. They've had to siphon resources off to stop Dale and the Rhovanions' advance, and it might be time, honestly, for Mirkwood to have another bite of the cherry. There's also Lothlorien, who are starting to make some inroads. Some of their basic units starting to put pressure on over here, but again, I think their own siege towers are actually getting in the way of what they might have wanted to do. Spear Guard and White Uruk Fearmongers, good enough pairing to keep a basic attack at arm's length for now, but if the elves do decide to bring forward some quality, that might change. Of course, as time goes on, we might see the Rhovanion and Dale get a few units to link up with them. And I think this is where they're starting to place more of their faith now, with Dalian Paladins now being joined by the second unit of Rhovikin nobles, so quality being used. Orc archers and other such out of ammo skirmishers being used to help plug the gap, as well as the Sauron's Will, who are made of sterner stuff certainly, but maybe not quite to the extent of the attacking units that are now being committed over here. Down, still the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, still a decent number of these throwing projectile units from the Rhovanion. Some tribal levy spears back there as well, so some numbers, albeit basic ones, from the Rhovanion over here. They might need yet a few more to help keep this attack going. Tribal berserkers still doing the business against these Orc javelins, even with how few of them there are. It's been a very bloody advance so far. Axes still pushing forwards. I mean, there are the Witchers. They are the wild card after all. Difficult for the attackers to focus them down. If the defenders are doing their due diligence, they should be keeping them safe enough. They have done. They are a little bit close to the action, but there's also not really a ton of ranged units that are able to do the business against them, which are on Blackguard heading over to that gate. I mean, actually, it does look as though they did try. There was some green fire decorating the wall over here, so they were trying maybe to get a hit over there. That is risky, because if they hit their own units, they're quite likely to send some of the weaker Misty Mountains units routing. You don't want to disrupt your rhythm too much. There's no need to take any undue risks at this point in proceedings for the defenders. I think they'll be quite happy with where they stand. Really, it's going to be a question of now, the Olag High. There goes the Dalian General, which is unfortunate for them. The Rhovanion General in close proximity as well. A lot of these two-handed weapon units for the elves close by, but the Olag High, as we've mentioned already, the strongest of the trolls that are on display today. As they bring them down, although the trolls may be overextending themselves just a little bit. Javelins banking their shots. More of these elven swords being committed, but again you see Mirkwood. Still got the Elven King's Guard. Good armour piercing damage, but this is pretty much the sum total of the Mirkwood army now. Good amount of quality, of course, especially in the bodyguard units that still live, but whether or not they can put the pressure on and turn the screw in the way that they may need to. These units still down in the moat. The dried out moat. A trench. Axemen, I mean, what are they going to do with these units? Narrowing the field has probably not hurt Lothlorien in this area of the They haven't really been able to make any sort of progress though. The Goblin King's Guard now moving down, a good quality unit, some Sauron's Will. Goblin infantry in terms of numbers as well. They have put the pressure on over here, the attackers, but the defenders have managed to keep them at bay with mostly basic units in conjunction with their trolls, and now sending down a bit of quality to try and truly shut that door. Still the pikes leading the way. The paladins being taken off the front line for the moment. Still 58 of them. Still a good amount that can be used. The Thala Rangers still trying. It's a narrow position that they're in, but they are able to get a few hits. Like I said, body piercing projectiles. Good amount of kills to be built up over there. Let's fight down here in the courtyard. I mean, Dalian Bowman, Bardian Marksman, basic units. It does look as though this is going to be a victory for the attackers down, or the defenders I should say, down in this area. And that is a problem because it means it's going to free up a bunch of units that the defenders can then use elsewhere, including the pikes and barrow-wights, of course. Chasing now. 99 Dalian Bowmen. All that remain. Try and get a few point-blank shots while they still can, but they're already shaken. Loss of the general, of course, means that Dale will be a little bit more susceptible to those morale shocks than they were previously. Engaged in melee, albeit pikes in the vanguard. It's an interesting choice. Guess needs must, just get into melee and stop those bowmen from firing. Heavy goblin crossbows. Crossbows can be such a menace when you can't shut them down, regardless of whether they're on the attack or the defence. Clank of the crossbows. Over here, meanwhile, Mirkwood having to bulk up on the front line. I mean, the trolls certainly getting bloodied. Elder Palace Guard taking a bit of damage already. Trolls will fall, but I mean, Mirkwood are going to be in a pretty sorry state by the time that they do, and the attackers, I mean, we're not even halfway through really in terms of the frames of the battle at hand, but you do worry here for whether the attackers can sustain things. I mean, Lorien still have most of their army left, in all fairness. That sort of quality, throwing axes, could be key. Blackwatch Legion, they've still got some units in reserve right at the summit here, including the drummers, which I'm surprised the drummers are way back here. They're not really doing anything up here. They're not great in melee either, so saving them for that purpose isn't exactly ideal. Lorien Bladesmen. I mean, to be fair, basic elven units like this will do very nicely against a unit like the Moria Spearguard. It's exactly the sort of foe that they're going to be very effective against. Defeat seems certain. They'll take any sort of small victory they can get here, the attackers, to try and get away, to claim some momentum in this fight. Reinforcements around here, but it's not a limitless sea of orcs anymore. Green smoke can only mean one thing. Where are they? They must have retreated again, purely because of the presence of those slingers. You don't want to put them in too much harm's way after all. Phalanx and the nobles of the Rhovanion fighting in tandem with one another. Again, they can't seem to get away from these blackback berserkers though. It's the slings which are going to give the attackers a bit of impotence over here. a guaranteed kill per hit, but the longer they can keep up that pressure, the better it will be for them. They still have more of those throwing projectile units as well, which they may need to utilise sooner rather than later, honestly, because they're starting to look a little bit sorry for themselves in some areas. Fellas and the other unit of Blackbacks doing well for themselves. It's down here where you worry the most. Body Marksmen have returned. Blackshot Dragon Slayers are over here, which will help shore things up. The Dale, very much now, having committed pretty much everything they have to offer. Victory seeming certain for the Temple Guard. See, they and the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, the same kind of unit. Paladins making their way across now. I think Dale and the Rhovanion have done a good job at shifting their priorities as and when they have needed to. There's only so long that their armies are going to be able to withstand these rigours, and then the elves are going to have to take up the mantle. Like this staircase over here, literally the only purpose of it is to hang a gibbet on the end of them. A very orcish architectural decision. Paladins are far more of a dedicated melee bodyguard unit, so those maces will crunch through that black Numenorean plate and chain. And there goes the Rhovanion General as well, in much the same circumstances as the Dalian one fell. How will those tribals feel about that? Someone's will. Just having a general look. There goes the Mordor general though. I mean, Orcish morale is not known for being the finest, so that is something they could maybe leverage to their advantage. Your forces fleeing would certainly be a welcome sight, I'm sure, for the attacking armies, as the slings continue to try and do their thing. This time going after the Snaga skirmishers, two cheap throwing projectile units, duking it out. Making our way up here, still got the Goblin Kingsguard, who are also taking their share of damage actually. Some Snaga archers, so reinforcements are there if they're needed. There's Moria Spearguard coming back. I mean, the pace of this fight over here, because of how narrow it is very slow, but certainly these goblins will not be too pleased about being sent into the meat grinder against those elves. Spearguard still. Adonai looping a few shots over. There's a lot of these elven units which are still way back in reserve, which from an attacking perspective is good in a way. Gives you a little bit more of a feeling that you still have something left to give, and then, well, Rhovikin nobles fleeing, that's not a good sign. Galathrim Axemen, maybe they should have sent a couple of units over here earlier, the elves, just to help keep things tied down, because more and more it's entirely based on tribal levy units from the Rhovanion that this attack is even still going, and when you're reliant on that sort of quality, things might not be going in your favour. Thala Rangers firing into the gap. Guardians of Khan Doom moving forward to give those Black Numenoreans a little bit of a helping hand, but it's still the Dalian Paladins and the Dragon Slayers that they're going after, so as adept as they are defensively, they are going to be outmatched here. The Angmar in line infantry, especially when they're taking point-blank hits from those handheld wind lancers. All units though, not scared about committing even more. Someone's will try and finish off this unit of Dalian bowmen. Thala Rangers nearby as well. Don't know how much ammunition they have left. They have been a part of the battle fairly consistently actually. It's hard to tell how effective they've been though. Not ideal firing lanes, but you wouldn't expect that when you're on the attack. Defenders should be forcing you into uncomfortable situations. Meanwhile, they did manage to force the Olag High back and get into the defensive position, but unfortunately, with those heavy goblin crossbows on Overwatch, I don't fancy Mirkwood's chances of efficiently being able to get through here, and I don't think their army is going to last too much longer under these kinds of tensions. Still a long way in this battle to go though, and it's kind of puzzling me, because I feel like under normal circumstances we'd be expecting to see maybe the battle end at around 50k frames based on what's left. One way or another. It's not exactly a limitless force now that the defenders have either. There'll be slingers now being used as a melee force. Numbers the order of the day. The Nazgul, Blackback Berserkers and Goblin Kingsguard, however, against the lowliest of the Rhovanion melee force. Still, the attack continues. And now, the assistance of some elves, maybe skirmishers, going to try and break the back of these Gundabad Guard over here. Still got a solid defensive force over here though. Still some Barrow Whites. Still more of the Gundabad Guard as they push their way forwards now. Angmar. With the intent, I assume, of trying to finish Dale off. Counter-attack alongside the Sauron's will. Can they bring down the quality that Dale still have? Still got a unit of Royal Patrol in here as well to help pad the numbers out, but many of these units won't relish being in melee against the Paladins in particular, but you can see now Blackwatch Legion trying to disrupt the formation, get in and amongst and surround the Dragon Slayers perhaps. And Great Shield Infantry though is not exactly the finest in terms of quality. When it comes to pure melee, Paladins, they don't want to be retreating from this situation. If they show their backs to the enemy, that's when they'll take too many losses for it to be worthwhile. Defeat seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Balance of forces still evenly matched. Still the Rhovikin nobles in there, to be fair to them, considering the situation they've been facing over here. Blackback Berserkers, Blackguard. They've done pretty well for themselves, actually. Crossbows in close proximity still as well. Only a few of them able to actually utilise their forces though. Cave Troll Drummers, keeping the Misty Mountains pointing in the right direction. Yeah, this is a little bit unfortunate. Lothlorien now sending over a couple of units to maybe try and prop up what remains of this. There's still some Mirkwood Rangers, but Mirkwood's forces, they really have struggled in this fight to gain any sort of position, Mirkwood. I think that was, the scene was set for that kind of early on when they tried to move in and were turfed out pretty quickly. They did show a bit more patience after the fact, but part of it is circumstance as well. It's just not been an ideal situation for Mirkwood to be in generally. As a result, they kind of end the battle without having made much headway at all into the fortress. Carrying on with Rangers that are out of ammunition. That must be, I would assume, the Misty Mountains General, which is a big loss for the defenders. Basic goblins may flee. Out of ammunition, Carrying Amroth Rangers with those two-handed blades getting into melee here, and they'll do nicely against Uruk Archers. It's just about trying to kill off as many of them as you can at this point, I think. Barrow White's still there. Fearmongers doing their thing. Still the Rhovanion have a little bit more to give. Dale forced back though. Concentration of force to try and wipe them from the field, not allow those bodyguard units to do the business. Don't want to chase too far though. They'll find themselves on the receiving end of elven axes, and they've got the Rhovanion tribals to help with numbers, which was what they took advantage of in terms of wiping Dale away. Bad guard, and too many of the Rhovanion units though are not really built for this sort of combat anymore. That will be a concern. Throwing axes being used. Heavy Slingers have done pretty well in this situation, to be fair, considering the horrible opponents they've had to go up against, but now I think they're going to be finished off by the advancing Blackguard. They've done pretty well recently in this battle at counter-attacking with Great Shield Infantry, albeit throwing axes now, trying to go after those dangerous Temple Executioners. do nicely in melee as well. They seem to be blank firing an awful lot though, which is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. They'll need to move if they want to be a little bit more effective. The caves have shown the biggest back and forth fight that the battle has undergone, really across the whole of it. Axemen will easily wipe away these depleted. I mean, to be fair, they have managed to save 20 Dalian Paladins, Dale. They've done pretty well at, in sticky situations, managing to salvage something, but that's only truly useful, I think, if you're able to bring it to bear late on in some meaningful way. Mirkwood Rangers, Mirkwood trying to do a little bit of damage here, and I mean, they're going after the right kind of unit. Rangers, even with those armour upgrades they have, the jet black plate armour that they now wear, it's not going to be enough to save them from that level of elven damage for all the arrows that do hit. Again, speculative shots over having to bank them, which has been the story of the battle really for the attackers in terms of trying to use their ranged units, ranged power. There's a lot of barrow whites still left. North Rangers have actually done quite well for themselves. Lothlorien Bladesmen just in the back also, forcing their way in, but immediately once they cross that threshold, the crossbows once again are going to do to them what they did to Mirkwood previously, I'm sure. It's not as if they're going to be able to force their way through here quickly either, because it's still the barrow whites that stand in the way. More javelins. Still, it's very narrow engagement, which, I mean, slowly but surely, I'm sure Lothlorien have been gaining a good KD for themselves, for lack of a better term, but that's all well and good, but you're going to need to start making some progress, I think, now. A lot of the attackers' hopes in the late game are going to have to be pinned on Lothlorien, because Dale and Mirkwood have next to nothing left, and what the Rhovanion have left is simply not at the quality level needed to force the enemy from the field. It's all going to be upon the Galathrim to try and see them over the line. I mean, they have the quality to do so. Mirkwood Rangers on their way in over here. Combination of the Galathrim Axemen and Sindar Blade Masters. Temple Executioners have taken a bit of damage already. White Fearmongers in support of the Black Numenorians. But the quality of the Temple Executioners is not deniable. Those blackened long swords. Some of these front lines, slowly but surely, the narrowness of some of these choke points, I think, has helped both sides. Whoever has had the lower quality, more defensively minded troops, which has flip-flopped really throughout the battle, but it has benefited both sides. At the moment it's benefiting the Rhovanion just in terms of how much time they're able to buy, because, I mean, you know, tribal levy spears and the very limited amount of nobles that still remain are going to falter in the face of Angmar bodyguards. Still a decent amount of Lothlorien units over here. Could have been better served being a little bit earlier in the battle, but better late than never, and now Lothlorien finding multiple pressure points as they need to. Mirkwood Rangers getting into melee, probably the most comfortable melee engagement that Mirkwood have been in throughout this entire battle, honestly. Arriving again maybe a little bit late to save some of these tribal units, but the Rangers will be slightly more up to the task of facing off against tired Gundabad Guard than the unit that preceded them. Galathrim Spearmen now over here. Blackwatch Legion trying to scurry back into defensive shape, chasing the enemy maybe a little bit too far. Infantry. And still, North Rangers. I mean, in all fairness, actually, the crossbows have not opened up, which has, well, it will mean that the Paranam North Rangers have been able to swing their sword a few more times, but the end result is still very much the same. This gate has been on lockdown the whole battle, and that is not likely to change unless, again, I think that the timing of reinforcements has been slightly off from the attackers. Like, those bladesmen really, if they wanted to make an impact over here, the crossbows are there, so I probably wouldn't have recommended it, but seeing as they haven't actually been shooting, the Bladesmen alongside the Karen Emerald Rangers would have been a more well-rounded attacking force, and it would have lasted a little bit longer. Still over here. Still largely blocked off. What a weird situation that is. Meanwhile, these crossbows sort of support Galathrum's spearmen have now arrived to help the more aggressive units, but those Temple Executioners have done a very good job in spite of the hits that they took from the slingers earlier on. There's still enough of them to cause a real problem for the elves. Average quality may be higher, but those Mordor bodyguard units, they've got plenty of options in that regard. Balance of forces evenly matched. The Rangers doing their thing. Still, those Tribal Levy Spears are wavering and exhausted, lost the general, but again, an impressive performance from them in this little passageway. Surely they won't last too much longer, however. Where else will we see? There's some Galathrim spearmen over here. The problem that Lothlorien now have is that they have to try and do something on multiple fronts, but even though they're in better condition by far than all their allies are, I don't think they necessarily have the numbers to be able to do that. Galathrim Axeman, do they still have a few volleys in them? They need to try and soften the enemy up. Indeed they do. More direct as well. Again, the DPS in a choke point like this is not huge, but you're going to need to try and still soften the enemy up as much as you can. Try and deal with those barrow wights. That low mass means they go flying in the face of those throwing axes. Warrior Bladesmen. Archers wheeling around as well. Still got some very high quality stuff in the background over there. Lothlorien now again. The reinforcements are going to make their way around to enter through the caves, but it's far away, and by the time they arrive again, the timing will be slightly off, you think. Spearmen doing a good job at stunting the advance that the defenders had going on over here. It seems certain. Still there. Black Berserkers finally forcing their way through those tribal units, but now they do have to deal with a unit of Galathrim Axemen who will be far more worthy foes. Indeed, depending on the condition of the Blackbacks in terms of how many hit points they've lost, the Galathrim Axemen might be able to overcome them, but it will be a close run thing. Still a few units of Goblin Infantry, interestingly enough, pushing their way forwards as well. Still a few arrows being looped. Those Ardenine shadow bows loitering in the background. Mirkwood Rangers just about going to be able to overcome this unit of Gundabad Guard, but the victories for the attackers are a little bit too small in scale for it to translate into an overall swinging of the pendulum, I think. Galathrim Axemen still able to utilise, or if they can utilise all their ammunition here, that is a little bit of a bonus. Get as many kills as they possibly can against these awkward to deal with Angmar defensive positions. The more those barrow wights they can kill off, the better. Pikes may yet be a problem as well, because Lorien can't exactly go in with a whole bunch of heft and mass. One Olag High remains, the Lorien Bladesman trying to finish him off. It's the more unique model as well. Another unit of Lorien archers, so some pressure still over here. Kingdom of Celeborn. They're going to move around to try and advance this way as well. Could be worthwhile. I mean, like I said, it's not as if the defenders at this point in time have got a limitless supply of manpower either. Everything from the town centre that they had fully in reserve has been... need to make up their mind what they're doing with those Kindred of Celeborn, but as I was saying, everything they've had fully in reserve has largely been committed. They've got a few units of fodder, some scattered remnants still that they can commit to an area should it be necessary, but I think this fight in the cave is going to be absolutely vital. If they can finish Lorien off over here, then they should have enough left in the tank to be able to win the battle overall, but if they can't, Lothlorien's quality and damage could yet be enough for the attackers to win this. Ooh, I see this. That is unfortunate. Galadhrim Axeman getting cooked. Yeah, the Witchers. Pantomime villains. I mean, you have to say, like, I do understand why people don't like them. They are a bit of a... I don't really know what to call them, really. They can be easily countered by archers, but the fact of the matter is, like, it's going to be difficult, especially if Angmar are on the defence. If they're doing their due diligence, they should be able to defend them well enough. I think with those hits, I did mention how if they can win this fight in the caves, I think they will go on to be successful in this fight. And with those grillings, I think that may be game, set and match. It's going to be difficult for Lothlorien to gain traction in the way that they may have been able to had they not sustained those 100-odd losses. Still got units waiting in the wings over here. Still some archers. I mean, Haldia still lives, so Lothlorien's general has yet to exit stage right. And we've got here Arrowites. A renewed attack from basic Lothlorien units, but there's not a huge amount of defenders over here. They may yet be able to force some sort of response. It's a long way in this battle to go, you know. Very peculiar. Lothlorien archers. Then there are the Kindred of Celeborn making their way to the caves. If they arrive, that is a big amount of quality Snaga archers on their way forward, but surrounding certain elements now. The Temple Executioners have definitely been a big unit in this particular battle. Heavy Goblin crossbows, don't know if they have ammunition or not, but even if they don't, it's just numbers at this point. Galadhrim archers looping their shots. After the Blackwood Legion, who are putting the pressure on Galadhrim Axemen and whatever remains of the Mirkwood Rangers. They do have ammunition, although they are pretty close. Tribal Levy skirmishers, are they going to be able to interrupt what the goblins intend? It would appear not. Don't really know what the Rhovanion are concentrating on at this point. I think that might be their last unit. They and Mirkwood pretty much with nothing left. Dale with nothing left. It is only Revios with his Lothlorien elves having to try and make something happen. Galadhrim archers moving forwards, forcing the goblins back. Kindred of Celeborn have arrived. Again, their throwing axes can be pretty devastating, whether or not they'll be enough. They also need to stay well clear of where the goblins can shoot them with those bolts. Cave Troll Drummer. Only one remains. Open those shots. Is it really worth going after the Gundabad Guard though? The Galadhrim Axemen will finish them off anyway. Really want to be throwing those throwing axes into the Black Guard, the Blackbacks, and the Temple Executioners. Those are the choices. Still a few units over here. Not yet ready to mount another attack over there. Any headway being made? And again, another attack that's being launched through here, albeit this one probably wasn't expecting it to win off. Still, another one thrown back by the defenders. Arrowites have been a real fixture of this battle as well, because it's so difficult to force your way through a position when they are there. Mass pushing may be the answer if you can get away with it, but yeah, it was difficult to do, wasn't it? Temple Executioners waiting in reserve. Heavy Goblin crossbows on high. Unsurprisingly, they will be making a target of the Kindred of Celeborn. little decisions like this that I think the attackers have probably gotten a little bit wrong as the battle has gone on, and most of these decisions the defenders have got right. Because it was all for the defenders too. I mean, you may have extra manpower as the Orcs, so a 3v4 isn't quite so daunting from a numbers perspective, but the overall quality of some of those entry-level troops, like, you could see early doors, systematically the way that DOL and the Rhovanion were handling business. They were doing very well for themselves, DOL and the Rhovanion, but that was always going to be... It always had a bit of a shelf life on it. It always had to be the elves that had to pick up the slack later on, and Mirkwood had a bit of a torrid time in this battle, and Lothlorien maybe a little too slow. And that can make all the difference. Still, I wonder if the Rhovanion player has gone AFK, because tribal heavy skirmishes is just sort of hanging out. I think they might be out of ammunition anyway, so I don't know. 129 very low tier troops, but still, those are the sorts of numbers that can make a difference at this late stage. Alien Paladins still. Dale's final unit, taking hits from those crossbows though. Still ever the dangerous unit, although the Temple Execution is now being laid low. Caliborn and the Dalian Paladins now moving forward. They will be intercepted by the Ardenheim Shadow Bows. Just in the background over there, the crossbows will almost certainly try to loop their shots at this point. They don't need to be fussy, they just need to get kills on key targets, of which the Paladins still are. I think Dale had a particularly good game actually. Considering the situation, considering the multiple angles they had to try and deal with, and considering the units they had at their disposal, I think they've done alright. I suppose still firing down. You can feel the battle is starting to wind down now, but still plenty of frames remain. Whatever happened to these units that were over here in this courtyard? What's going on here? How these Galathrim spearmen got all the way over here? I guess they moved out this way. Lothlorien archers? I mean, this is interesting. They have managed to finally deal with this position over here. And units now pushing in through this gatehouse, so they have managed to engineer a pretty decent little situation here, Lothlorien. It's whether or not they have enough in reserve to see themselves over the line, because even they are now starting to look a little bit battered. Defenders pulling back to the town centre. Barrow-wights and Witchram pikemen, that defensive bulwark that they've relied upon throughout the battle as a whole. Polearm units will be a bit of a problem for Lothlorien here. But overall quality might not. Orc fodder certainly not going to give them any sleepless nights. Over here. Well, I don't know, this could still go one way or the other. I just don't think that Lothlorien have enough in terms of numbers to be able to break down that defensive position that the defenders have at the town centre. Barrow-wights backed up by polearm units. You're going to need some sort of mass to crack through that, get in and amongst them, and then the elven quality can really go to work. Throwing axes from the Kindred might be the answer. Alien Paladins slowly but surely making their way through the Ardenheim, but the longer that they take, the more chance a bolt will pierce their hearts. Victory seeming certain for them here. A strangely paced battle, but I suppose that shouldn't be too surprising considering the overall length. Galathrim Axeman. What they need to be doing really is, well, and they are, Galathrim Spearmen pushing forward to try and interrupt those crossbows and kill them off, securing every bit of the fortress other than the town centre now. So to the attackers' credit, they have now managed to do that, partly due to the defenders' choice. They feel as though it's more likely that they can go on to win by defending the Star Fortress at the top. Lothlorien Bladesmen trying to consolidate what they have left now, Lothlorien. I think that unit of Dalian Paladins might be the only unit, along with these tribal levy skirmishers, but I don't know what Ricky Beagle's actually doing. Definitely has the feel of an AFK player. But That and the Dalian Paladins are the only two non-Lorien units still active for the attackers. This unit of heavy goblin crossbows is not going to last for too much longer. Defeat, a distinct possibility. Shaken and winded. Only a fool could lose this battle. This individual battle perhaps, but the overall one, there's still some work to be done before the attackers begin to set their sights on overall victory. Fight for the cave has really been the epicenter of the battle, as we have mentioned before, because it's been more back and forth than any other point on the field. Other areas, mostly the attackers have had to content themselves with simply making decent trades where they can, trying to put the pressure on. Still have ammunition in those Caern Amroth ranges? If they do, to try and use up every bit of ranged ammunition to soften the enemy up as much as possible before then falling upon them and seeing where things stand at the end. A few units, I mean decent amounts of Lorien Bladesmen. This is where some of these basic elven units can really earn their pay, I suppose. And still, to be fair to these heavy goblin crossbows, they've held on for a little longer than I would have expected them to, given the odds that they are facing. Spears landing their hits. Dalian Paladins still, 14 of them remain. I'd say no to a bit of armour piercing damage come the end game. Try and crack through the armour that Angmar and the Misty Mountains do wear. This is where the elves having archers that are solid in melee as well is going to start to pay some dividends. And there they go. Retreating back through those units so they will die to the last goblin. And now, it's really just going to be a case of stacking up attacking the final stand. And I think actually for these purposes we will actually go up to ×6 speed for now, because it's going to take a little while for Lorien to, I think, organise and decide upon what they're going to do. GULDUR, a far more multifaceted battle than it used to be. I remember the old GULDUR was the square fortress that had 3 gates in and then 1 ramp up to the town centre. Nice in its simplicity, but this is obviously a big step up from that particular map. GULDUR themselves, of course, as a faction, are still yet to be introduced, but I believe they are the last faction that is going to be introduced into the game, bumping into the unit limits as we stand. And a 5th Orcish faction as well. For now, however, their fellow orcs are the ones defending their citadel for them, and they may yet claim victory for them. Doing what damage they can, scoring what hits they can. The Kindred of Celeborn. Sort of standing and hoping for the best is... I mean, they don't really have too much of a choice at this point, the defenders. They've made their bed, they're going to have to lie in it, but those Kindred of Celeborn scoring a few good hits. Barrow-wights. How much in terms of ammunition do they still have? Caern Amroth Rangers might have just run out. Again, that might prove to be the problem ultimately. Do they want to try and attack from 2 sides? There's only one thing left to do really, and that's just move forward and see if you've got what it takes to overcome. Kindred of Celeborn will be a big part of that, because there's not exactly, in terms of damage dealing units, there's not really a whole load left for the defenders. Whiterroot Fearmongers are probably the best example of that. There's a 23 Witchhound Blackguard actually pretty decent. Not as good as the Kindred as it stands, but Also part of the problem is Lothlorien. They have access to one of, if not the, depending on what you're prioritising, best units of long weapon infantry in the game. But they only have that one unit and they didn't bring it, which is understandable because it's so expensive and it's only good in specific circumstances, but I'm sure that they would absolutely love to have the Carasgalgon's Guardians at their disposal now, because that would really make the defenders sweat, I think, because they wouldn't be able to rely on the phalanx formation to do the heavy lifting for them as they can in this situation. Although the fearmongers, they need to be a little bit careful. They're pushing forwards. If they do get up close and personal with the elves, that's where Lothlorien's damage can start to come into play. So we are now trundling towards the end, albeit I think this is going to be a battle of attrition to the end. And the question is purely, is the damage and quality and up-close punch of the attackers going to be enough, or is the defensive setup of the orcs going to carry the day? It is a little bit unfortunate that Lucky Beagle seems to have gone AFK, because 129 tribal levy skirmishers at this point in time, even if they are purely a melee unit, those are the kind of numbers that can be absolutely vital to the chances of your team. The Alien Paladins' victory being a distinct possibility. Blackguard still loitering in the background, getting that front damage. Paladins may be small in number now, but each armour-piercing swing will be worth its weight in gold. And I think the defenders realise that they need to try and set themselves a little bit more in a little bit more of a defined manner. But as they turn their backs, of course, that will leave the door open to just a few more casualties being inflicted. This is close. This is going to be on a razor's edge. They are bringing these crossbows back in. Again, I'm sure the defenders would love to have just a couple of shots from that Goblin War Engine at this point in time. Victory. How long can victory still seem certain for? I mean, the Barrow Whites again leaning heavily on them. They've been a real workhorse, as I've said, for the defenders in this whole battle. And they only need one last fight. The quality of those paladins. They need to be ready to commit reinforcements at a moment's notice, really, the attackers. The moment they choose to bring in the Kindred is going to be the moment where I think they'll really learn who's going to win and lose this fight. Basic elven units as well. This is the kind of situation in which they can thrive. It's just a case of whether or not there's enough of them. Grey Malorn cloaks don't exactly provide the most in terms of armour, but it's their skill and damage where they truly shine. Heavy Goblin crossbow still with some ammunition, but they don't have the ideal angle to be firing, really. Fellas. Still having to guard both angles as well. The announcer still fancies the chances of the defenders, but that will be skewed slightly by the fact that it does weight hit points quite highly, and with the Barrow Whites still active, it is a little bit of a strange one. But I would agree that unless the attackers can circumvent this defensive position a little bit and really make this a fight about who can deal the most damage, then this position should hold firm. More reinforcements though. Keren Amroth Rangers and Galathrop Archers. There's Elven Archers in melee. Spear Guard as well as the Black Guard. 13 Dalian Paladins still live. Not as many as those Witchram Blackguard that still stand. Mighty as well, the Orc Fodder. Very, very low stats across the board, of course, but just the numbers at this point, like we said for the Tribal Levy skirmishes that are currently AWOL, just having those numbers at this stage, anyone who can hold a spear and stand in the right direction is valuable. Only the Kindred of Caliborn in reserve, is it? There's still some Bladesmen. Not a huge amount, is there? I mean, looking at this, you might be tempted to siphon off some of those. I think there's just too many Barrow Wights for the defenders still. It's going to be very, very difficult to hack your way through all of them at this late stage, considering you don't have anything to do damage to them super quickly. Kindred are going to be the only ones, considering the lower numbers of the Paladins, that are going to be capable of doing such a thing. It does depend how battle-weary they are, how much damage they've already taken, which is hard to quantify, but I do think the defenders will probably be able to hold on from here, but we will see. It's definitely not a done deal just yet. Just in behind. Any Goblin crossbows. Archers still have some ammunition, so it's actually the defenders that do still have a few missiles at their disposal can be used. Again, the angle. Bladesmen. Last bit of reinforcements that can be committed before the Kindred have to move in. It's only 23 of them, but I think at this point it's a little bit of a case of all or nothing for the Elves. I think it's just throw the kitchen sink and see if that will be enough. I don't think it would be regardless, but I don't think there's any way really, as long as the defenders keep shape, that the attackers can win from here. Always still there. It's a tough one. It is a tough one. They've done very well for themselves in this fight. Interesting to see who's acquired the most kills from an attacking and a defending point of view. I can't imagine Mirkwood have had a particularly good time of it, but Dale have been involved for the longest amount of time in this battle, but Lothlorien, when they've come in, they have managed to do heavy amounts of damage, as you would expect from a faction with their focuses. There is another wing of the attack, putting some pressure on. Galatharim Axemen and Lothlorien Archers, I don't think they're going to be able to get through over here, but it does at least prevent these units from moving over. Now, again, it's another case, I think, these Galatharim units, the Kindred of Caliborn, reinforcements arriving just a little bit too late to make the difference that the player in question truly wanted them to. Again, I don't know how big of a difference it would have made necessarily, but sort of these little things, I think, which have added up throughout the battle.
If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
Lyra Fearmonger's doing a good job for themselves on the front line as well, albeit defeat looking a little bit more of a likelihood now that the Kindred of Caliborn have arrived. In terms of a defensive point of view, the strongest unit that was on the field, you would suggest, outside of the Nazgul. They're more of a special case. In terms of more orthodox units, the Kindred. That dual-wielding nature giving them huge melee defense values, as well as the fine Lothlorien armour as well. And Archers just in behind. I mean, at this point, 84 of them, you may as well commit them in. See what you can do. Especially if the only thing they're going to be doing is catching a few strays from these Snaga. May as well throw them into the fray. Still 11 of those Dalian Paladins. Try and blackguard. How many of them remain? Hard to try and find more than 17. So those great maces have definitely been finding their marks a little bit. As we now approach the final 10k frames, traditionally, of course, the actual final battle has been underway for a little bit, but this is where we will really start to motor towards battle's end. Will come Halberdiers. just forcing their way to the front now, trying to take most of the damage and the heat from the Kindred of Celeborn off of their allies. Here you can see the weird thing that happens when the very low mass Barrow Wights start to push their way forwards. They start to sort of dance through the enemy. Weirdly, for a low mass unit, they can actually force their way through lines as a result of that. I don't think it's an intended thing, but that's something to do with Medieval 2 at its base, not so much Reforged. More and more, it's only individual units that remain to the attackers. Not going to be able to keep things up over here for too much longer. And it's going to be mostly Angmar that remain at battle's end. Not really anything left of Mordor, very little left of the Misty Mountains, so it's definitely been a marathon, this battle. Both sides have had their ups and downs, but for the most part, from a defending point of view, it's mostly ups. They mostly made good choices about where they committed their units and what they decided to do, where they decided to put a bit of pressure, where they decided to counter-attack. It was a little bit more, you know, in terms of an attacking perspective, again, like I said, maybe a little bit too slow in some areas, but they've done pretty well for themselves, the attackers, in a difficult situation. As I've said, if you bring the elves in an attacking siege, you need to be very deliberate in your movements. Lothlorien have done reasonably well for themselves, but Mirkwood did struggle. Like I said, factors that add up on top of one another. It's going to take a little while for the Kindred. Of course, they will have to actually hunt down those tribal levy skirmishers as well in the caves, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue once they're done with business over here. I'm not sure what the point of sending these Lothlorien archers in when this unit had already fallen. This sort of wave-based system has never been a good idea. It's only good once you exhaust the enemy in certain ways and then send forward another force. But the enemy were not exhausted. You're not going to be able to mass push your way through with what you have left, so you may as well have just thrown everything in at once and really ask the question right from the get-go. As opposed to, what is it? I think this is the biggest lesson really to take away from this battle from an attacking perspective. Be deliberate with your reinforcements and commit them at the correct time when it's going to make a real difference, rather than basically just a conveyor belt into the enemy force. The Lothlorien archers will not be able to batter their way through the Barrow Wights. Well, the Barrow Wights don't do damage particularly quickly, but do it quickly enough. At this point in time, I'm sure the defenders will be in no rush. They know now that they are in the ascendancy. This is a matter for ×2 speed even. It is going to take them a while to wear down the Kindred of Celeborn. Would the tribal levy skirmishers being here have made a difference? Over 100 low-end units admittedly, but I don't know. I don't think so, based on the amount of Barrow Wights that there are still here. Starting to take damage at the hands of the Kindred now, but again, it's all of those matters of asking what-ifs. Forcing their way forward now, trying to really impose themselves with the numbers they still have available to them. There go the Lothlorien archers. Not actually routing just yet. They will now their formation has been disrupted. Celeborn victory still seems like there's still some Daedalian paladins. I've got to give them credit. Seems certain for those Barrow Wights. I think they will try and surround this elven position now. Even if it's just with something like the Snarger archers, it'll be a big deal. I mean, to be fair, considering the damage that the Kindred of Celeborn are dishing out, maybe that unit of tribal levy skirmishers would have made the difference. We will never know now. I'd be very surprised if this, even though the Kindred of Celeborn are a very strong unit and the Daedalian Paladins have been pretty heroic, but I'd be very surprised if they were able to carry the day all on their lonesome. Yeah, that's what they're doing. Fodder and Barrow Wights. Crossbows, nothing of any true danger if it were a 1v1, but it's the situation as a whole. You can see actually paladins going to try and block them for as long as they possibly can, just to give the Kindred of Caliborn as much time as possible to try and do that damage. The Barrow Wights for the defenders. The Dalian Paladins have probably been the single most impressive unit in terms of longevity and performance for the attackers. Orc fodder being sent against them, trying to do their thing. It's because they move more quickly. The Barrow Wights, of course, are very slow movers. Not doing too badly here, the Kindred. Yeah, I mean, the more I look at this, the more I think, you know, those tribal levy skirmishes, man. If they'd have been here, those numbers might have been enough. But alas, the Barrow Wights will swallow these paladins whole, and then the Kindred will be surrounded, and ultimately, yeah, this is another problem. Crossbows have been, as they always are in a siege battle really, they're always a bit of a menace, regardless of whether attacking or defending. It's a difficult thing to try and deal with them.
If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
Barrow Wights. Going to surround them now. It's going to be pretty much only Barrow Wights left, actually. Bladesmen, can they do it? Is it possible? The problem is they're going to be surrounded, which really means that your melee defense takes a hit, and that's the main calling card of a unit like this. As soon as you start to lose that, you see that they do start to drop a little bit more quickly. Those Lothlorien Bladesmen are hounding those crossbows.
If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
Fine margins indeed. I mean, this has been a pretty good showcase of how potent the Kindred of Caliborn can be at melee, I suppose. Because it looks fairly hopeless, but it turned it into a puncher's chance. Issue's going to be as soon as you hit that cliff where suddenly you don't have the units to be able to maintain a cohesive line, that's when things really do tend to nosedive. 9 Witcher on Blackguard as well. That's, again, just a little sprinkling of quality. But still, close run indeed. Probably one of the more hotly, well, certainly in terms of the length of it, it's probably been one of the bigger spectacles we've done in a while, this. Blackguard. Probably glad to see the fact that the Paladins have finally been dealt with. Not long for this world now. Only a fool could lose this battle. Well, I do wonder actually, is they send a unit to deal with them down here? Yeah, they must have done. Or a player admitted defeat. Oh no, the Snaga archers went down there to deal with them, fair enough. Shoot them and then deal with them. 88 Snaga still to arrive as well. I mean, in terms of the units that are left, it's been a close run. Defender victory, albeit an orcish defender victory, so I'm not entirely certain how popular that will be, but as far as the spectacle as a whole, that was definitely a good one. They have actually managed to force their way into the town centre as well, the Kindred. They're going to have to turn around and defend it against overwhelming odds now. Did Haldir perish at some point in the battle? I can't see him on the ranks of these remaining elves. Again, something which will have to remain a mystery, I guess. The Goblin crossbows still shaken up. Slowly but surely, the low damage of the Barrow Wights. Probably the most key unit in the battle as a whole, though they are going to be pretty much the last one standing and responsible for being able to outlast the final Elven onslaught. But throughout the entire battle, they've been a real roadblock for the attackers. it's a real boon that Angmar can call upon these guys in conjunction with the other defensive attributes that they have as a whole. Definitely a difficult force to face, regardless of where it happens. Maybe a little bit, you always know what Angmar are going to do, but stopping them from doing it is a different matter entirely. And there we have it.
Continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
The fortress remains in Orcish hands. Only just, though. I'm just having a look at this. I mean, 3% the difference in the end. 3% of the defenders remain. Not a huge amount. Not a huge amount at all. And a good, a big endgame splash screen there. But having a look, yeah, Mirkwood struggled by far the most, as we mentioned. Rhovanion doing a good job there. Good amount of kills. Lothlorien managing to overturn DOL throughout the battle as well. Later on, they managed to get some good engagements for themselves, and you know, the defenders pretty much evenly split between them. Angmar being a defensive bulwark, Misty Mountains being, you know, the numbers, and having those crossbows always helps as well. And then Mordor with some of the more specialty units, the high quality in terms of all of their various bodyguard units that we know that they have. So what did the damage for Angmar then? The last one standing really, the Blackguard, available right till the end. I mean, 693 on the Witchers. That goes to show that without the Witchers, they probably would have lost by a fair margin, actually, the defenders. So as much as they may be a controversial unit, there are times in which they are an equaliser, which makes games more, or closer rather, and I think that's more likely to be the case when they're outnumbered in a defensive siege like this Angmar. When they're on the attack, of course, they can undo an entire game's worth of good play from the defenders in one fell swoop, but you could also argue that in that situation the Witchers can't be safeguarded in the way that they can be in a defensive siege like this. So swings and roundabouts, I guess. The Barrow-wights, very key, you know, good amount of kill actually, 221, considering they're really just there to take damage more so than give it out, and Guard doing nicely also. Pretty much what you would expect really in terms of Angmar, a spike of damage from the Witchers, but from the rest, relatively even spread, and it's more their defensive attributes which set them apart from the rest. So yeah, big thank you to Flame of the Rebellion for sending this one in. I think Master Blaster might have sent this one as well. It was actually sent quite a while ago, back during release, but you know, my own personal schedule has been a little bit all over the place of late, so yeah, that is what it is. But yeah, I'll be trying to, I've got a pretty big backlog at this point, to be fair, so I'll be trying to chunk my way through that slowly but surely, as well as keeping up with those faction overview videos, which will be pretty much the bread and butter for now as we make our way towards the end of the year. And to be fair, I'm not entirely decided on what I'm going to be doing at the end of the year. Definitely there will be some sort of reorganisation. I'm a little bit doubtful over whether I will completely stop at this point, but there will have to be some sort of big reorganisation, I think, in terms of how I prioritise things. But that's a matter for later in the year. Still several months before then, which will be going on as we have for the last few weeks, I think. So yeah, big thanks to all the players involved. I hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.